Good afternoon, glory to Ukraine. Hello everyone. Hello to those who watch us live and those who will watch us later. I would like to remind you that Tvoe Misto Media Hub has initiated a series of meetings with prominent personalities from Ukraine. Sometimes we also invite experts from both Ukraine and other countries. We have already talked to various experts in their fields, prominent historians, scientists. We've even had some rock stars here and psychoanalysts. And we invite the journalists from foreign media because these meetings are aimed at explaining Ukraine and the context of this war to those who cover the truth about Ukraine today and brings it to the world. Usually we have these meetings in English, and starting from the previous one, we started broadcasting it live. Today's meeting will be in Ukrainian because of the importance of this topic for the Ukrainian society, because we'll be talking about the 8th and 9th of May. The whole world is celebrating the Remembrance and Reconciliation Day. We had some brief, solemn ceremonies in Lviv today, and we had a very emotional and very powerful address by the President of Ukraine, who was speaking about what the never again phrase means for us today. We have invited super interesting and super experienced speakers today. This is a famous publicist, journalist and writer Vitalii Portnikov, and historian, researcher of the insurgent movement, and who also used to be the leader of the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. This is Volodymyr Vyatrovych. We'll be talking about the role of Ukraine in the Second World War, about the lessons we have to learn and the world has to learn from this, and about the importance of the 8th of May and the 9th of May for us. I suggest that we start from Volodymyr Vyatrovych. So what was the role of Ukraine and Ukrainians in the Second World War? And what does the world understand now, and what does it still have to understand, proceeding from the analysis of the history? Well, we can look at it from various angles. From the point of view of the global history, we have to understand that Ukrainians participated in the armies which defeated Nazism. Millions of Ukrainians were in the Red Army and in Ukrainian insurgent armies. Tens of thousands were in the UK and US Army and Polish Army. So altogether, they contributed to the defeat of the Nazi Germany and to it signing the act of capitulation. So we can actually say that we were the ones who contributed to the defeat of Nazism. But unfortunately, Ukrainians didn't have their own state in times of the Second World War, and therefore there was no Ukrainian army, and Ukrainians fought in all those armies which were fighting on Ukrainian territory. Very often this was the war of Ukrainians against Ukrainians, Ukrainians fighting for the Red Army against the Ukrainians fighting on the side of the Third Reich. They were killing each other for somebody else's interests. And the only Ukrainian factor during the Second World War was the Ukrainian insurgent army, not only because it consisted of Ukrainians mainly, but also because their primary goal was to establish independent Ukrainian state. And therefore, the Ukrainian experience of the Second World War is much more dramatic and much richer than how it was portrayed during the Soviet times by the Soviet propaganda. It is much more multifaceted than what it is painted like by the present-day Russian propaganda. And therefore, Ukraine and Ukrainians and Ukrainian leaders have to do everything they can to strengthen the traditions of celebration of the victory in the Second World War, which integrate Ukraine into the European tradition. I helped introducing the Remembrance and Reconciliation Day on the 8th of May, and this is just a transitory period to get rid of the 9th of May as the Victory Day, which used to be celebrated in the Soviet Union, is now celebrated in Russia. Unfortunately, we haven't made this final step yet, although the Ukrainian society is completely ready for that. The latest sociological surveys show that 80% of Ukrainians do not want to celebrate the Victory Day on the 9th of May. They believe that this is the monopolization of the victory over Nazism by Russians, and this is the basis of this cult of exaggerated victorious hysteria, which actually is the basis for education of the present-day soldiers killing Ukrainians in Bucha, in Hostomel, and now in Mariupol. So we need to distance ourselves from the Soviet memory about the Second World War and the Soviet traditions of celebrating the victory in the Second World War and join the European traditions. It's not only about historical justice. In this particular situation, this is also a matter of security, because the cult of this victorious hysteria is one of the tools to mobilize Russians to fight against Ukrainians. What rituals are used by the Russians to celebrate the victory? And coming back to historical events, so how much did this victory cost? How many Ukrainians were in the army during the Second World War, and how many of them died? Well, there is no exact figure about the Soviet Union. For a long time, it was standard to say that it was 20 million, then 27 million. Now we believe that this is not an exact figure anyway, because the real losses of the Soviet Union were concealed, and they keep being concealed by the present-day Russian Federation. But we know that Ukrainians have lost 8 to 10 million people, most of them civilians, because unfortunately the Ukrainian territory was in the center of fights between the two totalitarian systems, the communist system and the Nazi totalitarian system. At the same time, talking about the contribution of Ukrainians in the fight with Nazism, we have to remember the 6 million of Ukrainians fighting as soldiers of the Red Army and as soldiers of other armies and military organizations, and contributing to the victory over Nazism. What concerns the traditions Russians have now to celebrate the Victory Day, they are a little bit updated Soviet traditions. The military parade, this military pride, and military rhetorics. This is what dates back to the Soviet Union, to 1965, when this day was proclaimed a day off in the Soviet Union and started being transformed into the main holiday of the Soviet country. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was celebrated by inertia, by the society, and then starting from about 2005, it has become one of the main state holidays for the present-day Russian Federation, and was used as one of the tools to keep their influence over the post-Soviet state. They initiated this Immortal Regiment March and started using brown and black St. George's ribbon to show the importance and impact of Russia in the world and in the post-Soviet space. So we know that the March of the Immortal Regiment is also held in North America and in Western Europe. That's how they are trying to monopolize their victory over Nazism and to conceal this way the crimes committed by the Russian army on Ukrainian territory, which right now are commensurable with the crimes of the Nazis. Thank you. You also mentioned the important role of the Ukrainian insurrection army. Why did the veterans of this army recognized as war veterans only in 2018? It was actually in 2015 in the context of one of the laws on decriminalization. In fact, the Ukrainian insurrection movement and Ukrainian liberation movement were under the scrutiny of the Russian propaganda. They were trying to blame them for the crimes against Ukrainians. They were trying to claim that they were collaborators fighting for the Third Reich. And the information about the Ukrainian insurgent army was concealed for a long period of time, and it was only after 2004 that the situation started changing, when the KGB archives opened, and the information about the insurrection army and what it was fighting for started changing the opinion of historians and then of the society in general. And that is why in 2015 we had the grounds to adopt this law. And today this is also the ground to reconsider the role of the Ukrainian insurrection army by Ukrainians themselves. More than 80% of Ukrainians, according to this sociological survey, perceive the Ukrainian insurgent army as fighters for Ukraine's independence. And I think that's because we are fighting for our independence right now, and Ukrainians feel that they continue the fight which was started by their predecessors fighting in the Ukrainian insurgent army, and they see how present-day Ukrainians are blamed to be Nazis, and they are actually, this fight against them is represented as denazification. Thank you. We have been talking about the role of Ukraine in the Second World War. So what lessons should the world have learned from this? What do you mean by this, the Second World War? Well, I would like to talk about the lessons from a different perspective, and I would like us to distance ourselves from the fact that we are constantly trying to argue with Putin and with Russia on this, so to say, Russian historical track. We are trying to prove ourselves and the world that Ukrainians are active participants of the Second World War, that the victory would not be attainable without Ukrainians, and that is true. One of my grandfathers died at Kursk salient, and the other one participated in all important events of the Second World War and died of the war injuries. But before that, he was paralyzed for 10 years because of one of the injuries. So this is not a historical experience, this is a family experience. But we still have to understand very simple things in regard to Ukraine, and they are important. Number one, the thing which I believe is most important and somehow everyone is reluctant to talk about. The Soviet Union was not planning to fight this Nazi Germany. They didn't want to become an ally of the UK and the US. At that initial stage, they were the allies of the Nazi Germany. And together with the Nazi Germany, they destroyed the Polish state, and they were proud of that. Molotov, the head of the Council of People's Commissars, claimed that Poland was created by the Treaty of Versailles, and it was an ugly thing to do. So they were against the Treaty of Versailles. And Stalin sent Hitler telegrams about friendship. And these are the texts which were published in Pravda newspaper. This is not some secret information. And if Hitler did not attack the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941, the Soviet Union would have never fought against the Nazi Germany. I'm convinced about that. So we were lucky, the humanity was lucky, because if the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany fought together, we don't know what kind of world we would be living in right now. You might probably learn about that, but I, as a person of Jewish origin, would not have been born at all. And I had a chance to not be born after the war as well, when Stalin was deporting the Soviet Jews in continuation of the Nazi policy. So this is the first important thing. The second thing, which is important to realize that Hitler attacked the Soviet Union just like he attacked Poland before that, because he had this idea of extending the Lebensraum, the living space. But what this fight was not, well, it was really a fight for preservation of the historical Russia Putin is now talking about, because the Soviet Union was really this historical Russia as viewed by Stalin as its leader, and he actually clearly expressed it in 1945. And in 1941-1942, the Soviet Union came back to the concept of the historical Russia, stopped talking about the fact that the history of the state starts in 1920, and they introduced the orders of Alexander Nevsky, Kutuzov, Suvorov, and Bogdan Khmelnytsky as a person who was in charge of annexation of Ukrainian lands to the Russian state. And this is also a very important thing to know. So now we have this question. For the majority of Russians who lived in Russia or in immigration, there were many people like that as well, it was obvious for them what they were fighting for. They were fighting for the preservation of this historical Russia, and they understood if Hitler wins, then Russia has no chances to exist, neither in their historical nor in any other form. Although there were millions of people who thought otherwise and joined General Vlasov's Russian Liberation Army or supported Hitler, like the generals of the former White Army, who thought that Stalin regime is anti-Russian regime. Anyway, these people were a minority, and Ukraine, all of Ukraine, was in a state where they were disoriented. Millions of Ukrainians served in the army of the Soviet Union, but they were fighting for the concept of the historical Russia. The Ukrainian state was destroyed in 1920. The Ukrainians were fighting not for their state, but they were the soldiers of an empire. They were the soldiers of an anti-Hitler coalition, but they were not the soldiers of Ukraine. And the question about the fate of Ukraine was not resolved at all. As of May 1945, it still remained a colony of the Russians, of the Soviet Union. A rightless one, even more rightless than before that, because the first thing the Soviets did after the victory, when they became a real empire, they started fighting nationalism, Ukrainian, Jewish, Georgian, Azerbaijani, Kazakh, Armenian, and so on. They were destroying everyone who could be considered a carrier of the national spirit. They intimidated these people. So the story of the war on this territory, this is a different story than a story about Russia. It's clear what they're celebrating today, and it's clear what they celebrated yesterday when it was still not the victorious hysteria. They celebrated the salvation of Russia, just like in London they celebrated the salvation of the Great Britain. But for many colonies of the empire, this was not the same holiday, and when we do not talk about that, we have a very misleading historical situation. We are trying to prove to Russians that we were just like you, we were together with you. Yes, we were with them, but not because we wanted to, because the Russians who fought together with Ukrainians in 1941, they occupied Ukraine in 1920. They were those people who accepted the Bolshevik regime and fought for this regime. As a society, they were the witnesses of the Ukrainian genocide, famine, Holodomor, and the destruction of Ukrainian cultural movement. Why don't we talk about that as the factors that contributed to the development of the situation on the territory? And that brings us to another trap, which we can't get out of as well if we keep doing the same things. How can you, if you are the people who won the Second World War, how can you celebrate the memory of people who collaborated with Nazis, with the followers of Hitler? We, Russians, don't do like that. We don't put up monuments to General Vlasov. However, he was also a fighter against this historical Russia as well. And you name the streets with the names of people who went to Berlin, who established groups and military units of Abwehr, who believed that collaboration with Germany, with Hitler's Germany, will bring Ukraine independence. Bandera, Shukhevich, and Melnik, we have streets, monuments, avenues. So either you go this way or you go that way. And we are the prisoners of this narrative, in a way. And I would like to repeat that if we don't look at the history of the country as it is, we will not be able to understand what was happening during the Second World War. The Calcutta airport is named after Subhas Chandra Bose, one of the most prominent independence movement leaders. And posthumously, he's received all possible awards in India. But he met Hitler. He came to Germany in March 1941 using a Soviet visa because the Soviet Union was an ally of Hitler, and they helped Bose get through Moscow to Berlin. And Moscow and Berlin were discussing the assistance to the Indian national movement and the government, which was led by Bose, who has been cooperating with Hitler and the Japanese during the whole Second World War, and then died in a mysterious plane crash when he was trying to flee the Allies, the British, the Americans, and the Soviets. But Indians still consider him a hero. Well, I may not like it as a Jew, because I understand that if these people won, they would not give my people any chance to continue their existence. But still, I remember also Abraham Stern, who established the Lehi militant group, who actually believed that at this stage of history, the British are more enemies than the Germans. He didn't want to believe in Holocaust. He was looking to establish contact with the Italian fascists of Mussolini, and he called upon Jews not to join the British army when the Second World War started, and that was the only possibility for Jews to survive. I don't think I need to explain anything about that right now. So even the death of Stern is considered to be a mystery, because it is considered that the representatives of Haganah, a parliamentary organization, another Jewish organization, actually contributed to that. This is just a theory. No one knows for sure, but his name has been given to everything that could be named with his name, despite this historical mistake, because he was a hero fighting for independence of Israel. He's the hero of the Jewish people, and his march of the combat legions is known to all Jews in various translations. Everyone knows these lines, just as Ukrainians know the lines of the Chervona Kalina, the red snowball tree. Well, his enemies actually imitated the contexts with the representatives of Mussolini for him, so that no one thinks that he actually contacted Hitler's allies. So we always want to have this black and white scenario, while it is impossible. But I think that today, in 2022, when we see what is happening, this is probably the main lesson of the Second World War? Was it the fight of good against evil? Yes. Was a part of evil supporting the good? Yes, because the Soviet Union was as evil as Hitler's Germany. And now if we talk about this fairy tale parallels, which Ukrainians like so much and somehow call the Russians orcs instead of calling them just Russians. So this is a story when Saruman would join your fight against Sauron. It doesn't happen in fairy tales, but it happens in real life. And after the Second World War, we got the world which remained the world of evil, as if there was no victory over Hitler. We just closed our eyes to that. We gave half of Europe to the Soviet Union, and that is not everything. We allowed this empire to exist as a nuclear state, just the same empire as Hitler's empire used to be. And even in 1991, we actually fought for having a single center of nuclear arms in Moscow. And now in 2022, we think, will they use the nuclear weapons or not? We are just like back in 1944 when people were thinking, will Hitler have enough time to make the bomb or not? And the heroic Stirlitz from the 17 Moments of Spring, the classical Soviet movie, was doing all the best for the physicist who developed the bomb to be in the concentration camp. So we made a full circle, and we are in the same place as in 1944. But at that time, one could hope to still survive, and say, I'm a Ukrainian here in Lviv, so probably the Germans will kill first the Jews, then the Poles, and will not touch Ukrainians. Now it's the global Holocaust. And this global Holocaust we have come to, we can only believe that it will not happen. But our belief in the fact that it will not happen led to the fact that no one actually made any conclusions of the Second World War. Winston Churchill said that the main result of the Second World War is the coexistence with evil, and this coexistence continued for more than 80 years, and it still continues. So this is a threat of our elimination. In today's speech by President Zelensky, he called it the reconstruction of Nazism in a much worse way. And you also added that we feel as if we were in 1944 right now. What can we do about that, except believing that the worst will not happen? So here is Volodymyr, he's a politician, so maybe he could answer this question. Well, first of all, I do agree with Vitalii that we have to learn to look at history with our own eyes, not being afraid that our neighbors might not like it. We have the right to do that. And secondly, the world has to understand and to recognize that in 1945, a big victory did not happen. It was a big tie when one of the evils was liquidated, but the other one remained and actually governed half of Europe, which continued until the end of 1980s, beginning of 1990s. And now a part of this evil wants to take revenge for its loss in the beginning of 1990s. So one of the historical lessons is that when you compromise with evil, that makes evil stronger, and it can take revenge after that. So we see that Putin wants to take the revenge for the loss in the Cold War, and he explicitly states that the collapse of the Soviet Union is one of the biggest geopolitical disasters. So his goal is to restore the Soviet Union, and nowadays the world and Ukrainians have to understand that any attempts to find ways of coming to an understanding with Russians will only strengthen Russia. And if Russia remains in the same format of a supranational empire, then even if Russian troops are thrown out of our territory, this will be just a ceasefire until the next war. It's like the first Chechen war ended with the victory of Ichkeria, and the Russians signed a truce, but then they accumulated forces and then destroyed the country in the second war. So the same might be expected by Ukrainians when we talk about today's Russian-Ukrainian war. And we have to tell the whole world that Russia cannot remain in the same format as it exists. It can't remain an authoritarian supranational empire, because it turns it into a threat for Ukraine and for the whole world. And the whole world has to become brave enough to start discussing how to make Russia stop being a threat to the whole world. This was what happened after the military defeat of the Third Reich. This denazification happened, and this was not something the Germans wanted. This is something that was done by the new governments. That's why we have to do the same, because I don't think that the Russians have any internal potential to get rid of their imperial heritage. How many years do we need for that? Well, it's hard to say, but we have to understand that the whole world, including Ukraine, should focus on the military defeat of Russia. We have a question which foreign journalists often ask us at meetings like this. This is a question to both of you. What do you consider Ukraine's victory in this war? I have partially answered this question. I believe that Ukraine's history is to make Russia cease exist in that format, within those boundaries and with the present regime. This may be considered a final victory. Everything else is just a truce. I'm not saying we don't need a truce, but the final victory will come only when Russia stops existing as a multinational empire and stops posing a threat to Ukraine and to the world. Thank you. Well, I believe that Russia as a multinational empire can stop existing only after Russification of all the nations within that empire, and at a certain moment we will understand that there are no other nationals except Russians on that territory. This is the concept of academician Pivovarov, one of my good friends from Moscow, and he's one of the first Russian intellectuals who started saying that Russia can only be preserved not when it falls apart, but when the people stops considering themselves Russians and start considering themselves Russian nationals. And 10 to 15 years ago, I already saw people like that, despite their ethnic origin as Tatars or Buryats. And I think that all these talks about Russia falling apart are not very realistic. I assume they might lose some territories in Caucasus, and like Austria-Hungary, they may turn into a dualist Russian Tatar state, but it will not change much in essence. And that's why the Ukraine's victory is a different thing for me. I believe that Ukraine's victory is the international recognition and guarantees of Ukrainian boundaries, well, ideally before 2014, when we have clear and guaranteed state borders recognized by us and other states of the world, including the Russian Federation, and also Ukraine's accession to NATO. I think this is victory. If we are under the nuclear umbrella of the United States, the UK, and France, we will know that an attack to this internationally recognized territory will not be possible. And the development of the Russian Federation after that will be a matter to discuss between the Russian Federation and the Chinese Republic, because this is not our history. This is the global standoff between the authoritarian world and the democratic world. It may happen with the use of strategic nuclear weapon or not. Whether our country will survive in that condition or not, we don't know, but this will be already a global war, probably not now, maybe in 10, 15 years, but we have chances to survive in this war only if we become NATO members. If we become NATO members, that's a possibility. If not, then our state will cease to exist in the near future. That's why I believe that this will be our victory. And there's another important thing. I've always said that Ukrainians have to pass 2 exams. The first one is the exam whether Ukrainian people are able to build a national state. And the second exam is whether the Ukrainian state can exist and keep existing within the boundaries of the Ukrainian Soviet Republic of 1991. We haven't passed both of the exams yet. We haven't passed either yet. We are not controlling all the territory we have. We hope we will, but this is a matter of the successes of the armed forces. This is not about politics at the moment. And second, we don't know what conclusions will be made by Ukrainian people as a result of this war. Well, citizens living on Ukrainian territory, we hope that they will draw the same conclusions as we do, but they don't. This was after the revolution of 2004, after the revolution of 2013-2014. So I actually warn against hoping for this right now, because we may wake up after the war and see that they have not realized anything, because none of the state-building exams have been passed by the Ukrainian people yet, and we have to fight for us to pass this exam eventually. But that may cost us a lot in terms of human lives, in terms of economy, and so on. But otherwise, we will cease to exist, or Ukraine will be limited to 5 regions in Western Ukraine, which is not a big reconciliation to me as a person representing Greater Ukraine. Well, we believe that this time we will manage, but we all have to contribute to that. Do we have any questions? No? Well, I know that our speakers are limited in time today, and I would like to thank them for finding the time to join our conversation today. I wish us all to achieve the victory and to understand all those things which will be important after the victory as well. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Thank you.